It's gotten worse for goalkeepers too, because when I was growing up in '99, Brandon Scurry's making saves on the 6-yard box. You know?
I kind of feel like goalies should still be allowed to do that. Like the
Yeah,
skill
you
should
could
be
take
how
as much
far you
space
get
as
off
you
the
want.
line. Yeah. This is like this is so stacked against you. Get as much space as you possibly can.
That is real kamikaze. Yeah.
Well, dear listener, if you haven't figured it out already, this week's Patreon episode is what I hope will become an annual tradition where in the middle of the playoffs, we really get into the nitty gritty of the year that was in NWSL goalkeeping. So we are welcoming back to the show our favorite color commentator. You know her from NWSL Plus and Saturday night broadcasts on Ion and Amazon Prime, and has a couple of U.S. women's national team caps to her name herself. It's the one, it's the only, Jill Loyden. Hi, Jill.
Thanks, you guys. Thanks for having me. And also, thank you for carving out space for, it seems like a position that everyone kind of forgets about. Or
Until
doesn't understand
they
truly.
really don't.
Until they really don't. No more appropriate time to talk goalkeeping than the playoffs, when goalkeeping can become the single most critical factor that ends up determining the fate of your team. Evan and I got into it a little bit talking about, and maybe this is a good place to start, talking about Aubrey Kingsbury and now having saved 6 of the last 7 penalties she's faced in the playoffs, which is just sort of mind-boggling. And what, Evan, she's now saved 38% of the penalties she's faced in her career.
In her professional career, yeah. Which is a ridiculous figure.
No matter what happens with the rest of her career, she will probably finish as an above-average penalty stopper. But right now, she's sort of stratospheric. How much do you think she's an outlier versus has gotten a little bit lucky over the course of her career?
I think it's 3 things. One is, I know I've known Aubrey for a really long time, and she is meticulous about her preparation. So she has uncovered every single probably pen that these players have taken in their entire career, which side they favor, especially in high pressure situations. Number 2 is, no matter the situation, Aubrey's never too high and she's never too low. She's always just like steady Eddie. I think of her really similar to like Edwin van der Sar, and just very in control, very calm, very serene. And the last thing is, especially against racing, I mean, that was a position that some of these players had never been in their life, never assumed that amount of pressure before. And I think that certainly plays in her favor of someone who is calm, done their homework, been there, done that, and has a little bit of a presence about her as a good penalty saver. And so then that puts the pressure on the attackers. And so I think it's threefold, but that's really like played into her advantage in penalties.
I think what we're always curious about, because you know what we do, you can go your entire career as a goalkeeper and maybe on the outer fringes of your life as a penalty stopper might face 40 penalties, 45. And that's if you're like an everyday keeper for over a decade. It's a small sample. And so I wonder if there is a way, especially because we've often talked off air about like how tricky it is to like nail down goalkeepers from a data point of view because of the sample size. Like when you look at players who have big reputations, high, strong reputations, but have very different outcomes, if you look at it in the aggregate, from your point of view as a player and as a coach, like how do you try and identify what might actually be sticky? The things that a goalkeeper might be doing in penalties might actually signal that like, no, they're actually pretty good at what they're doing and not necessarily just like on a run of form, as it were.
Yeah, I do think there is a little bit of like psychological warfare that comes with penalties. I mean, you even think back to Jordan Bloomer, like one of the things that separates her from everyone else in this league is that she's got a really big personality. It's really loud. It's in your face. It's abrasive. And that off-puts people when they get to the penalty spot. They've got enough time to think about it. She saves one. And now Angelina's like, oh crap, this woman's actually really good at this. So I've got to nail this. I've got to add more deception. I've got to add more disguise. And when players start to do that, they slow down and become less intuitive. And it really does play in the hands of goalkeepers. And just during this conversation, I think back to, I played with Lisa Devanna, who you guys probably remember, the Australian striker.
Yeah. Big personality.
Yes. But we were talking one day when we played for club, and she was like, I hate playing against the US. And I was like, really? And she's like, yeah, because I am legitimately afraid of Hope Solo. And I don't want to be around her. She is so intimidating. and it gets in my head before games. And that was really great insight for me of like, wow, like we haven't even played one single minute and the goalkeeper already has an opportunity to get in somebody's head before a game. And I think there's certain goalkeepers that carry this penalty gravitas, like Aubrey, that even before the first kick, it's in the strikers' heads. And now after she saves one, it just is a snowball effect and even makes this insane amount of pressure even more insurmountable.
Take us behind the scenes in terms of that kind of preparation, because before last year, Kingsbury had never been in a penalty shootout as a professional, ever. And now she's saved 6 out of 7 pens in that context in the last 12 months. So when you are somebody like Kingsbury, who, as you say, prepares a lot to be ready for these kinds of situations, and then she spends a decade never having to face it, how do you get spooled up to be ready when your number gets called, as it were, as it was last year against Gotham and then this year against Louisville?
I do think it is a preparation and watching film and seeing people's, run up and their approach. Do they have a really long run up? Do they have a short run up? Do they slow down? Do they change their tempo? Because with your brain, the more familiar you become with a pattern, the quicker that you can react to it. And when that pattern gets interrupted, it's a little bit more difficult and takes more time for us to be able to react. And so when you see someone's pattern, maybe you've watched, last year, Esther take 10 penalties in her career, you get a little bit more familiar with that pattern. You get a little bit more familiar on the distance in which she would run up to the ball, and then you have some more time. And even if you get 2, 3, 4, 5% a little bit quicker, that's going to play to your advantage in penalties. And so I think just doing your homework and also just being steady Eddie, like not thinking, well, I've conceded 3, so I have to save this one. It's just, I'm going to rely on my training. I'm going to rely on my preparation. And I'm just going to react to whatever the game gives me. I think that is definitely an advantage for a goalkeeper in penalties.
You're the perfect person to ask this question. Years ago, Tim Krul was brought along to the World Cup by Louis van Gaal as a penalty specialist. He was not going to start games, but he was going to be subbed in the knockout after extra time or right at the end of extra time, just for penalties alone. Do you think someone with the profile like Aubrey Kingsbury, who may or may not have established herself as a dominant force, would a national team be smart to carry that person? And how does the dynamic work bringing in a goalkeeper exclusively for penalties who might not start a match?
I love it. I love it because, like we were talking about, the presence, it just adds to the psychological warfare. Like Tim Krul is what, like 6'7"? He's huge. He's freaking huge. He makes the goal look smaller. Like that is an absolute advantage to someone who looks maybe a little bit smaller in the goal or doesn't have this reputation for being a fantastic penalty saver. And so I think, it's something that I would definitely consider if I was a coach in knockout football. You have 7 games. It could happen in knockout. Once you advance, it could be a supreme advantage to a team. But I do think that there's other factors that go into it, right? If someone's a jerk, I'm not going to bring them just because they're good at penalties. If it's going to disrupt, the entire environment, right? If someone doesn't have experience in a tournament, that might be also something I consider. If they're also not a great backup and they're my number 2, that might be something I consider. So I do think that it's not just can you save a penalty or not. It really is you have to be, a good fit for the team. But I do think that it is an advantage if you have someone else, if you have someone who is superior at that skill.
Great, you have this specialist who we all agree can't be an asshole. But how does it work for the starting keeper who's played 119 minutes and is essentially given a vote of no confidence as a penalty stopper because they have been subbed out? Do you view that as something that could disrupt a keeper's confidence, your number one's confidence, by replacing them later in a game?
Listen, I think anytime the coach can be as transparent and clear as possible, everyone can know and accept their role. So if I know that I'm going to be the starter, but if we go to penalties that I'm going to be taking out, I can 100% get on board with that if that's my role and that's my responsibility. And ultimately, at the end of the day, your job as a goalkeeper is to make your skills subservient to the greater whole. And if the coach thinks that someone else is better, I've contributed the 120 minutes as much as I could. But if someone else has to take over to do the penalties and that's going to put our team in a position to succeed, then that's what you have to do. But I think if you're going to make those calls, it has to be before the game, especially if it's not the final, because then you might have to play another game after that.
So before we go to some of the other goalkeeping performances in the quarterfinals, I wanted to go a little big picture and talk about trends in the way that the position is coached, the way that it's played. You know, I remember last year when we talked about how now and just can't carry a number one who's not good with the ball at their feet. And you look at the average pass length in yards has just continually decreased year over year, and that trend continues. And then maybe there's this weird, interesting trend in the global men's game where like shot stopping is being prioritized more than being part of the buildup, at least relative to what it used to be like 5-10 years ago. Is it still in the NWSL really important in your mind, and maybe in the minds of coaches, that you need to have your first buildup node be between the sticks?
No, I don't think it's as important. I think, when you look at teams like Racing Louisville, they have an X factor named Taylor Flint in the middle of the park, and they'll use their goal kicks as like an attacking set piece. And so, if the opponent's going to press, they're fine. They're fine. Let's go up and in. And it's not a long ball. I think there's a difference between a long ball and a long pass. And I think that they target specific areas, specific players. And not only is it a long pass to Taylor Flint, but it's a second ball structure around Taylor Flint so that they can win the second balls. And it is creating, overloads in specific areas of the field so that they know they can hit a chest, bring it down, and play out of it. So I don't think it's necessarily like we have to build deep and we have to play out of the back. I think there's different mechanisms and tools that coaches use to, one, they have to assess like what talent they have available to them. And two, how do I use that in the best way possible to control the outcome? And so you look at a Racing, and I think their average goal kick length is like 60 yards, which means they never build out of the back, right? And then you look at San Diego, where their average goal kick length is probably like 15 yards. And so they have two different types of goalkeepers. Neither one is right or wrong. It's just, does that goalkeeper fit within the style and the framework that the head coach wants to employ? And so for myself, like, I value well-rounded goalkeepers. I value goalkeepers that could play in the game that's 10 years from now, that we don't even know what the game 10 years from now is going to look like, but they're flexible and adaptable enough to be able to change their game to fit within the game model of their head coach that they're currently playing for. Whereas if you look at a goalkeeper who maybe is just a good shot stopper, they wouldn't be able to play on any single team in the world, or maybe even in 10 years' time, if they didn't continue to adapt and evolve.
I was going to pivot now to Orlando and Seattle. So Anna Morehouse, Claudia Dickey, both good shot-stopping reputations. Not necessarily like great passing reputations, although there's probably some nuance there. Dickey has become probably the goalkeeper of the year favorite. Seattle, which obviously did not get the job done in the quarterfinal, but really overperformed defensively, probably a lot to do with Dickey. What is it about Dickey, and maybe also how she's evolved just over the last 3 seasons, to make her such a dominant shot-stopping force?
I don't think it's really that important for her to be as calm and composed with the ball at her feet as it might be for some other teams, because Seattle has 3 center backs. They're mostly decent on the ball, and if there's no immediate option to play through, they're really comfortable to play over presses. So, Claudia Dickey doesn't often have the ball at her feet too much, and they typically play with a double pivot who's more known for their defensive actions anyway. But I think Claudia would also be my vote for goalkeeper of the year this year, because I think it's not about necessarily who's the best. I think it's who provides the most value to their team. And when you look at what Claudia has been able to do defensively, if you throw in 12 more goals to Seattle's goals against, they're nowhere near playoff contention, because they play where they just are comfortable scoring one and holding out for a 1-1 draw or a 1-0 win. And so when you throw those 12, that could be 12 different results that she's swung on her own. For as much shit as Laura Harvey has got, with the Chat GPT thing, I think going to a 5-back and playing the style that they play was the safest way to play, given that they had all this young talent who, when young talent comes into the league, can be really high, can be really low, can be streaky. And you've got these old players who you don't know how much they're going to be able to be available for minutes wise. Like, how many minutes can Lou Barnes play in a season, or Jess Fishlock, right? And so Laura chose this game plan that was going to be like, all right, listen, if we don't score, it's fine. We're going to be in every game. We might get a point from that. And we're going to play this 5-back, and we're going to make it absolutely miserable for people to find time and space in the penalty area. And so what that did is we're gonna crowd out the flanks, we're gonna crowd out the middle, and that left space at the edge of the box. And when Claudia Dickey's seeing shots from the edge of the box, that's like her bread and butter. She's the most athletic goalkeeper in the league. She can move really quickly. She's explosive. Her eye to anticipate a shot and where it's going is the best. And so it really suited her skill set the most. I think she has evolved slightly. We're seeing her more comfortable in 1v1 scenarios, which we hadn't really seen her in before. The save that she had against Yasmin Ryan pops out against their first game against Houston. And we know that Yaz isn't known for like being a prolific goal scorer, but it showed a different side of Claudia Dickey earlier on in the season where she was never showing that before, where she was aggressive, coming out, closing the space, and getting into a spread shape. So I know her goalkeeper coach personally, and he's one of the best in the league, and he's worked with Ashlyn Harris and AD Franch, and one of his strongest suits as a coach is 1v1s, and she's definitely adding some more preventativeness to her game. We didn't really see it at the end of the year, but more in the beginning when Seattle was trying to still figure out who they were.
Unfortunately, the best that Dickey is probably going to be able to hang on her trophy wall is a Goalkeeper of the Year trophy because Orlando took them down. Bit of a tricky Haley McCutcheon goal that was the deciding factor. What did you see out of Anna's season that really stood out to you in the whole?
You know, I'm not her biggest fan. I have question marks about Morehouse, and her inconsistency, I think, is really what it comes down to, is that she can do incredible things like, the kick save against, I think it was Maddie Mercado. Fantastic, right? But then she passes the ball to Eugenia and she scores, or Leon, or whoever it was. She lets the ball under her foot, early on. She takes a touch into Gift Monday earlier on in the season. And I think, the position that she takes against Tanaka where she gets clipped over, like she's just too inconsistent for me. And I think of some of her weaknesses last year got masked by an incredible defense in front of her. I think she probably saw the easiest shots of the league in terms of any goalkeeper. She came up big in some moments, but she also let in some really soft goals and ones that weren't necessarily capitalized, like against the Spirit last year where she drops the ball in front and they almost score and they almost draw that game 3-3. I just think that there's a level of consistency that we need to see from her to really be considered one of the better goalkeepers in the league. And there's moments, there's flashes, but it hasn't been sustainable enough for me.
It's funny thinking about Morehouse because when you think about the highlight reel of gaffes, she had fewer of them this year, particularly in the first half of the season. She was just, I don't know, on tilt in a bad way for many, many games, but seems to have sort of recovered that. Do you think that this is where the mental component of the game comes in? Do you think that streakiness is inherent to the position, or do you think that it's inherently a flaw in certain goalkeepers like Morehouse?
Yeah, I think this is the hardest thing for goalkeepers to overcome. When I reflect back on, because I coached Kellen Sheridan when she was a rookie, and she was really streaky, and like it was really high or really, really low. And it is a skill that is honed and crafted over time. And the more experience you have and the more comfortability and the more familiarity that you have with making mistakes and the pressure that you are having to play under every single game, it gets easier and easier and easier. And you have less times where you're, questioning if you can do this. And those come fewer times throughout the year. And when you get to those places, you're there for less frequent time. And so I do think that it is something, when you see a young goalkeeper come in, like Mia Justice, like she did great for 2 games. It's really easy to be great for 2 games in the NWSL because you're riding this adrenaline, and you only have 90 minutes to concentrate for. But really what would show me more is if when she makes a mistake, can she recover from it? Not just in that game, but 3 more games down the line when you've had more time to think about it. You've had more time to dwell. And I think we saw that with Mandy McGlynn this year. There was no pressure on Mandy as much. There wasn't as much pressure on her last year with Utah in a new franchise, and you're just becoming a starter. And I think she was the best player on the team, right? Like in terms of her possession and her shot stopping. And then this year, you have the U.S. jersey up for grabs, and that it's an open door for you, and that you have a tool that no one else in our country has in possession. Mandy struggled under that pressure a little bit in the start of the year, and she recovered and she got over it, and she was able to start performing better in the league. But I think it is something that we don't really take into consideration as much is someone is facing this level of scrutiny on a weekly basis against the best teams in the world every single week. In the Super League, I'm sure it's a little easier for Fallon to deal with that pressure because you're playing a good team every other week or every 3 weeks where you're truly getting challenged. But I think it is harder, and it takes more time for people to be able to become familiar with that pressure, cope with that pressure, recognize that pressure, and be able to regulate it over time. And I think, the Jane Campbells of the world, the Kaylin Sheridans of the world, we have seen them grow up in this league and really master that skill.
Maybe to move on to Kansas City Gotham, which I think has a lot of goalkeeping actually to discuss in this game. First off, Lorena is probably the other candidate for goalkeeper of the year, and I think the underlying numbers actually really back that up. She and Dickey are pretty level. But Lorena has faced, I believe statistically, the easiest shots of any keeper this season. And in this game was felled by 2 chances that sometimes you might be in the right position for. What are the challenges of being a goalkeeper on a team where you are not necessarily facing the top level shots or that many shots over the course of the game? Is there a baked in challenge to that, or is that a preferable place to be?
No, that is 100% a huge challenge. And, during my era of the US team, that was your task. You're going to get called on one time and you have to come up with that save. And once that moment passes you, you're screwed if you don't make it. And you're in your head for the rest of the game. It is an inherent pressure that you have to play with, but it also is a privilege because you get to play in front of the best defense in the league and they can bail you out at times. And you're also playing with the best attacking players in the league. And so if you make a mistake, okay, the attack's going to be able to score at least one typically in this season. There is an inherent pressure to that, but it also, I think she has the easiest job mentally because her job is so simple. Like, Vlatko has just been taking this wide range of goalkeeping and just really narrowed in on one aspect. And Lorena does that one aspect pretty well, and it's shot stopping. She's not asked to play with her feet. She's not asked to protect the space in behind the back line. She does well at protecting the goal area, but there's one thing that she has to do, and it's shot stopping. And I think that is what separates her. And we saw that last year with Schultz as well. There wasn't this big range of task. It was stay in the goal, shot stop, and make sure the ball doesn't go in the back of the net.
Does that feel like Vlatko got his goalkeeping tactics right, as it were? Does it make sense for a team like Kansas City to ultra simplify a goalkeeper's responsibilities like that?
It makes sense. I mean, I think it depends on the coach's willingness to take risks or not. And then which ways do they take risks? Because I do think Kansas City plays rather conservative defensively when it gets into their half of the field. They get a lot of numbers back behind the ball, and they make it difficult for opponents to find space. So what you need in that, and we've already referenced that with Seattle, is you need a good shot stopper. But the thing is what's the negative downside of that is hard to transition from deep areas, but not when you have a player like Schwinga. So that is a risk for Seattle to play that way defensively, but it's not as much of a risk for Vlatko to do that because it actually suits their attack really well. I think that's one of the things that Kansas City did so well this year was really link their defensive game plan with their attacking skill sets. Is where can we create turnovers and create space that Schwinga can get into, or the quick combinations is not maybe just one long pass, but win it in the central position, connect one pass, and then find Schwinga. So I think that it suits their game plan really well. I think that he also takes some of the risk of building out a way that some coaches are willing to take and some aren't. So I think it fit his approach really well.
It is funny that the Jaden Shaw goal is such a unique chance that Kansas City really hadn't given up all season. Sharples sort of misreads the ball, and then so rarely has Kansas City faced a very talented attacker running in behind with time to sort of pick their place. Lorena stays home for that particular instance. Do you feel like a keeper who is seeing more of those opportunities might take a different approach? Or do you feel like she's just sort of leaning back on the fundamentals of what Kansas City is asking of her?
First of all, in my tallies of goals, I track every single goal all season long. They didn't concede one goal like that all year long. Not one opportunity. They didn't concede a 1v1 all year long. And so I think that the goalkeepers have to do 2 things really well, I think, is one, understand the game right? If there's a touch that they can impact, okay, go, and understand themselves really well. Like, if you look at Mackenzie Arnold, she'd rather sit back and react than go be preventative because she doesn't really have those different techniques, right? And I haven't seen it from Lorena yet if she does or doesn't have those, but in her mind, I feel like she thinks I'm better at reacting. I'd rather sit back and react and take away as much of the goal as possible with my frame and my shot stopping. Where she got it wrong is she never set her feet. And if you look at it, when Jaden Shaw is striking, she's still moving to the near post. She's still moving to the side. And so when you're doing that, you're moving to that near post, it becomes incredibly difficult to stop and then go back across your body. And so then your foot sweeps out from underneath of you and you get no push. If she were set in the right position and actually balanced, she puts herself in a better position to make that save. I also think she over-rotated to the near post when she could utilize that frame a little bit more to the back post.
And on the other side, Ann-Katrin Berger now with 2 seasons under her belt in the NWSL. A dip in her shot stopping from last year, but was still very solid, definitely saving more shots than allowing in. Pretty garish looking mistake on the Ellie Wheeler goal in that game. What did you make of Berger reading that and the mistake that she made? Because this is, again, not something that a player like Berger does really ever.
Maybe we talked about this last year, but I think there's 5 tasks of a goalkeeper that they have to be able, 5 jobs that they have to do. So they have to communicate, protect the goal area, space behind the back line, and start the attack, right? And for me, I think Berger does that the most completely. I think she's the most well-rounded goalkeeper in the league. So all that preface with that, she is my favorite goalkeeper. Definitively, I will say that. Just because she's well-rounded and she allows her team to play in any way, shape, or form, right? And you can't put any goalkeeper in Gotham and they would succeed. But Berger, because of her well-roundedness, succeeds there. I think that she's an emotional goalkeeper, and you saw it in the Euros against Spain when they scored. She was cheating. That's why she got beat. She was cheating against Ellie Wheeler, and that's why she got beat, is that she played the odds of, I think that Ellie Wheeler is going to shoot to the back post, and so she was slightly off balance, which is why you kind of saw her drop her left shoulder and dive somewhat backwards because she was all balanced on her right side. And fair enough, Ellie Wheeler takes a touch that you've seen that so many times in your career as defending that they hit it to the back post and they curl it into the back post. And if you get stuck and you're not moving, you're never saving it if they hit it in the right spot. So she starts to lean just a little bit, and she was surprised that Ellie Wheeler went back into the near post. To me, in those positions, you can only cheat when the ball is like over halfway. If you cut the goal vertically, if you're in halfway, you can start to cheat there because they can't go back the other way. But Ellie Wheeler's position and her body shape allowed her to go in both directions. So you have to be as set and as balanced as you can be. If you make that save, you look brilliant. But if you don't, it looks bad.
Ann-Katrin Berger has to be considering the 4 or 5 other attackers who are middle of the goal to far post that are also there. The number of potential deflections and the likelihood that you're going to see a shot from a fullback from that position. I sort of thought it was understandable. My question is, goalkeeping, so rarely do you have to play in sub-freezing weather, and gloves are weird like that. How much do you think just the conditions of the day, the sunshine is a thing, but also the cold is a thing? And it seems like that ball stings off her hands and into the net, as opposed to a thing she might have normally saved or parried. Do you feel like that's an element there?
Probably not, honestly.
Maybe
Like
not.
yeah, honestly not, because your adrenaline's just rushing at that point in the game. Like, it's in, stoppage time. You're on the verge of winning. You don't feel anything. You see that ball and you're just literally trying everything in your nature to keep it out of the back of the net. And so I think the reason why it hits her hand and stings like that is because she has no power through it, because she's going one way and then has to change direction to go back the other, gets no push, and it just hits her and goes in. So, playing in so many cold games in the Northeast my entire career, it just becomes like numbing, and that's it. At the end of the day, you're just focused on your task. And I think that if it was potentially a ball that was like served in from across, that the sun could have a little bit of a factor on that, but not necessarily in that situation.
Portland, San Diego might also offer an analogous contrast in goalkeeping styles and approaches between Mackenzie Arnold and Kaylin Sheridan. Arnold, by our data that we have, probably the number 4 shot stopper just in terms of how we measure shot quality, and also the second worst goalkeeper in terms of the way that we measure controlling your area, claiming crosses, parries and rebounds on tough shots, etc. and so forth. Whereas Sheridan has also garnered a reputation, kind of like Berger, all her career, of being pretty well-rounded. Great passer, great shot stopper, etc. Talk us through how Arnold and Sheridan fit into each of their team's structures. Sheridan's maybe a little bit more obvious, knowing how USWNT kind of reinvented their tactical approach this year. But Arnold, especially with Bella Bixby coming back, there was the potential maybe for competition at the number 1, and Bixby did come in for a few games when Arnold was dealing with some fitness. So let's start there and tease out what Rob Gale wanted to do with his defense and his stylistic approach and how Arnold fits into that.
Yeah, I think first it's probably important to mention the amount of pressure that Mackenzie Arnold was playing under, because like the Portland fans, when she would make a mistake, they would really point that stuff out. I mean, that has got to be so hard for, 20,000 people. Then you're like, oh, well, they'd rather have Bella Bixby in the goal. And, fair play to Bella, because coming back from her maternity leave, I think she came back better than when she left. Like, she really worked on her game while, whether it was through watching film or training, but she came back, she's better. She's more well-rounded since she had her baby, and she performed well this season. I think that was like another piece that Mackenzie Arnold had to contend with was, okay, well, Rob Gale is preferring me, but it doesn't feel like 20,000 other people are. And so, I think Rob Gale has said stuff in the media about it, like, hey, you need to back our goalkeeper. That was like another piece that she had to contend with. But I think she's more comfortable on the ball, which is why Rob Gale gave her the nod. Not necessarily that, Portland is this like heavy possession team, but there was an effort to get, Sam Coffey on the ball, the midfield onto the ball, because they potentially had the best midfield in the league with Hina and Sam and Liv and Jesse, with obviously Hina moving on. But I think that there was this element of, okay, well, the opponent can play longer direct passes over our press. We can run back with strong center backs, play Mackenzie Arnold, relieve pressure, or instigate a little bit more of a deeper build so that we can get Raylan Turner on the ball higher up the field with less people to have to dribble against. So I think she was a solid fit. I still think when you play for Portland Thorns that you need to have like a big personality in goal for the Thorns. I mean, they have outwardly said that they want to be considered one of the best teams on the planet. So I still feel like I kind of want more from a Portland Thorns goalkeeper.
Yeah, it does not help Bella Bixby is from Portland. Like that was,
Yeah.
that's like a tough situation to be in. Portland will often, unlike say Kansas City, leave their goalkeeper out to dry. How do you feel like that suits Mackenzie Arnold's game or Bella Bixby's game?
I don't think it does at all. I mean, there are moments where Mackenzie Arnold has come up with some big 1v1 saves and been really aggressive, and it's typically in a smother. She feels really comfortable in that type of final action. I'm still looking to see more final action tools from her, because the more tools you have at your disposal, the more problems that you can solve, right? If you think about golf, if you only have a driver or putter, it's going to be really hard to play a round of golf, right? But if you have more clubs, then you have more ways to solve problems. And I think that's something of her game that I'm looking to evolve. And, I often think about this. I'm just like, man, what if we actually had the best goalkeeper coaches in our league? How would that change our goalkeepers, right? Like when you think about from the men's game to the women's game, goalkeeper coaches are getting paid a lot more money on the men's game, right? What if we had some of those coaches in our women's game, how some of these players who have this insatiable hunger to develop and grow and get better, how that would, improve our goalkeepers within our league? I still think that's an area we can continue to grow. Our league is to be able to develop more goalkeepers through better coaching.
I'm sensing maybe a new line of business growth for the Keeper Institute, coaching the coaches, perhaps? I wonder.
I have been approached, and until they get a team in Philadelphia, I will remain a color analyst.
I think that's probably best for your work-life balance in the end. Sheridan, what else is there really to say? She's played in a lot of different stylistic modes across her career, whether she was with Sky Blue / Gotham, and then when you move from a Casey Stoney team to a Yona Shaidoval team, that's going to ask very different things of your goalkeeper. Obviously, they came up short in extra time against Portland, but I think everybody agrees that the Wave is maybe one of the most positive 180-degree shifts from one season to the next in the league this year. So what did you make of how Idaval and Sheridan and the Wave goalkeeping coaches fit her game into this very high possession build-out approach that Idaval wanted to implement?
The San Diego Wave have 3 exceptional players, 4 maybe, with Kalen and a skill set that not everybody has. Ken Zadali, and I would throw Savannah McCaskill in there too in the double pivot, and Delphine Cascarino. And in the beginning of the season, teams weren't ready for that. They didn't really know how to slow them down. And so, with Kalen's ability to solve pressure, okay, we're going to force the other team to come out of their mid block. We're going to get them to stretch vertically and get their first line to press us or last line to drop off. And that's a perfect avenue for us to find Delphine Cascarino in space. And we've got players who are committed to getting forward, with Kenza, Pearl Maroney at times as well. And we're going to get her in isolation moments, a little bit deeper up the field, quick combination play, Gia Corley in that space as well in the pocket. And I think that game plan suited them really, really well. And I think as the season went on, I don't think they adapted enough because they had those scenarios less and less often where they had more space running at opponents' backlines. Whereas in the second part of the season, teams were like, okay, just have the ball. We're just going to be super disciplined in our shape and we're going to get numbers back behind the ball because you know what? You guys can't finish against low blocks. So we're just going to sit back a little bit further and you can have as much of the ball as wherever you want as possible. But when it gets close to the goal, we're going to really crowd out those spaces. So yeah, I don't think that every single goalkeeper in the league can play the way that Kalen does because there's just so much nuance to what she does. And you might see a pass to the center back, but there's so much, the speed of the tempo that she plays. Like she plays slower passes to bait the press. She is very intentional about that tempo. She'll play a slow pass. She'll see the opposition closing, and then she'll change her angle of support away from the ball to get that person to chase her. And then she has more time to complete a line breaking pass. There's, the tempo, the angles, the baiting with the bounce passes into Savannah McCaskill. Give it to Savannah, get it back, instigate that press, play beyond it. There's just so much that's going into the scanning that she's doing because not only is she scanning for the first line that can impact her, but she's also scanning for, okay, where's Delphine? Where's Kenza between the lines? Where's Gia between the lines? Because as soon as that press comes on, I have to be able to break it by playing one of those players. So I don't think that any goalkeeper can play in that system, but I think it suits her skill set really well. And also insulating some of those young center backs with experience in front and behind was really helpful for San Diego as well.
Yeah, it's a little bit mind-blowing to think that the Waves preferred center back pairing. I think their average age was 20. So I have to assume that Sheridan is a massive, massive help to get those two sorted and help them develop.
I still think they have strides to make defensively. And, Kaylin comes back from season and we have a look at her season. There will be a lot of defensive things on the, some final actions that we'll take a look at, positionings that we'll have a look at because I think there's still some room for her to continue to grow in that element of the game.
It's funny to talk about growth because, Sheridan's reputation speaks for itself. She's been around forever now. And I'm looking just now at sort of the list of the number ones this year, the primary number ones in 2025. And so many big names either turned 30 this year or they're about to turn 30, or in the case of somebody like Alyssa Nair, 40 is a lot closer for them than 30 is. But this feels like we might be at an interesting generational inflection point. So first question along those lines is even though the age curve is a much gentler downward slope for keepers than it might be for other positions, how do you see the way that performance changes as goalkeepers age, especially into their 30s? And what sort of skill sets do they have to then accrue for whatever measure of athleticism or speed they might lose, even though it might be smaller than a winger or a forward?
I think 2 things really come to mind. I'm actually reading this book about parenting, which I think has a lot of crossover with coaching, which is why I'm reading it. And it was talking about how when you're young, there's a lot of flexibility in the way that you think, and there's flexibility in behavior change, much more apparent than when you become older. And it really started making me think about the way we coach at TKI is we try to create a really broad experience for players so they have experience solving multitudes of problems in multitude of ways, right? If you're only fast, you might not ever develop your hold up play or your positioning into the midfield, right? So when you're younger, it's a lot easier to change, and she'll still try to figure out who your identity is. When you get older, you kind of get stuck into, this is my identity. And when it comes to a situation where it could be black or white, they know which one they're going to choose. And when it's gray, they're still going to choose that same one. So if you feel really comfortable, reacting and staying on your line and not impacting the ball, when it's clear that you're going to react, you do. And when it's gray, you could do either one, and either one could be a possible choice. You're still probably going to tend to stay back and react, right? It's curious to me because right now, and probably like the last 5 or 10 years, the position has changed so much, more than any other position in the world. And I think with that, we had to alter our coaching to reflect and mirror that evolution and transition. I don't necessarily know if that generation did or not. Like that generation of players, coaches evolved with the game or not. But it's really hard when you see a player like Jane Campbell potentially, or even Casey Murphy. They had an opportunity with the national team earlier this year. And Emma Hayes was really clear, I want a goalkeeper that can play out of the back. And she also had said, Listenaire is one of the best of all time, but we couldn't ask her to necessarily do that. But with the new goalkeeper that we're looking for, we want them to be able to feel comfortable with the ball at their feet. And so you kind of saw those players start to evolve and adapt, but it's really hard to do that when you're having to perform on a weekly basis every single Saturday or whatever it is, when you're trying to evolve and adapt your game in your training environments and then putting it into a game where maybe you don't feel like that's completely really developed quite yet. And so then we saw them making mistakes. And I think that was one of the reasons why Fabrice went with Abby for a bit of time, because Jane was trying to evolve this element of her game. She made some mistakes, and then it kind of took away from what she's actually really good at, which is shot stopping. So I think that that's probably the hardest part, is that generation goalkeeper is asked to evolve a little bit while they're playing in games every single week. So I think there had to be this patience with them to say, okay, I'm asking them to do this. I'm going to give them ample opportunities to try this in games. And I have to make sure that my training design and my training session reflects what I'm asking them to do so that they can feel more comfortable. Going back to, the thing that we were talking about in penalties, the more patterns and recognitions that you see over and over, the easier it is, the quicker that you can solve things. So I think, not only are you being scrutinized every single week, and you're playing against some of the best players in the world, but now you're asking to change and rely on something that's outside of your intuition becomes really hard in a position where you can't hesitate.
Maybe it's not a bad time to just talk the U.S. women's national team goalkeeper picture right now, because it's really open.
It's very
Yeah.
funny. Anytime Eric and I have to do an international window episode for about 12 months, the final question is always like, well, who's the favorite to be the number one? And we never really have a clear answer. Every window, Emma Hayes is making sure everybody is cycling in and out. I mean, it seems like Fallon Tullis-Joyce, Claudia Dickey, Mandy McGlynn are the three in contention by this point now in the cycles. What have you observed about the way those three keepers have performed in a U.S. context? And what do you think about the way that Emma Hayes kind of wants to deploy her goalkeepers in the tactics that she and the U.S. coaches are building?
Your guys' guess is as good as mine, honestly. I thought, when as soon as Emma took over, I thought, okay, well, the perfect fit is Mandy McGlynn because she is good with her feet. And, early on in the season when she had those opportunities, I think she knew that was her separator and played to that strength too often. And any strength can also be a massive liability if you use it in the wrong circumstances. I think she became a victim of that early on and really hasn't had many opportunities since then. Fallon kind of came out of nowhere because she was playing good in the Super League, and she's a good shot stopper and she's massive and she was in a good run of form. And we all know Emma plays a hot hand. So whoever's playing well, that's for me, that's really, a great thing. It's a positive thing because you're never out of it. If you're playing well, she's going to play you. And I think all three of them give a little bit of a different look. And it will be interesting to see what center back pairing Emma plays as well. Once Tierney gets healthy, if she sees that as a potential center back pairing. I mean, it's hard because I think Claudia and Fallon are the best pure shot stoppers. But if you want to play in a different style, I think Mandy is your best goalkeeper. I know people won't agree with that because she hasn't necessarily been a great, well-rounded package all year. But I think she has the potential to be that once she becomes familiar with the pressure. Because I think she has shown glimpses, even dating back to her Gotham days. You guys, I saw her when she was coming out of the draft. She was just a shot stopper. That's all she could do. And she was really good at it. That's all she could do, though. She played one season with Kaylin Sheridan and Dee Dee Harachich at Sky Blue, and she learned how to play with the ball at her feet. She went over to Sweden and she learned how to take a cross. She comes back and plays at Gotham under Abby Smith, and she learns how to protect the space in behind the back line. I'm telling you, I have never seen someone take their game to that transformative of a level in 3 years as a pro when you're having to play games. And Mandy McGlynn played for Gotham. Once Abby got hurt, she played the entire season at Sweden, had experience, and she evolved her game in those 3 years better than any goalkeeper I have ever seen in my coaching career. So for me, that tells me, okay, this person can adapt. This person can evolve. And also this goalkeeper has a skill set that no one else has. Where she's faltering is the mental side of the game. I hate to say that to me, that's the massive separator on the women's national team. Like when you think back to Brandon Scurry, Hope Solo, and Alyssa Nair, they had a mental edge on every single opponent. Until you're in that position, until you have that jersey on and you take the field, you will never understand the amount of pressure that they are having to play under. And that, the pressure can make you have a response that's fight, flight, or freeze. And until you become more experienced with that pressure, it's really hard for you to see someone's best talents emerge. The question is just how much time does it take a person, and can they adapt, or they're not just capable of adapting? So that's, to me, the question that Emma Hayes has to answer.
I believe when we spoke last year, we sort of thought that Mandy McGlynn and Katrin Berger were kind of like the two standout keepers of last season. And Mandy McGlynn did so under a ton of pressure and probably kept a not particularly respectable Utah side more respectable for long stretches of that season. We talk about the amount of data you need to have to assess a goalkeeper. It's not like her numbers this year were particularly bad, but they weren't standout the way they were last year. Do you think she has time to recover and become the number one? It seems like she's very good at adapting ultimately, and this is more of a blip. Is that how you read this?
Yeah, I mean, she's proven that she can. Whenever you are trying to rate someone's potential, you can't just look at their current performance and say, oh, they have so much potential or they don't. You have to know a little bit about their story, right? Has so-and-so had opportunities to train with some of the best coaches? Are they adaptable within the, getting information and applying it right away? And I think that in her past, she has shown that she can do that, which is actually, like, to me, the most hopeful part about her is like, she's kind of like clay. You can mold her in any way that you need, and you can mold the game plan in any way that you want, because you have a goalkeeper that can play super aggressive vertically to protect the space, or she's good at claiming crosses. She is the most penetrative passer in the world. You play with Zornoza, and who's constantly trying to receive at an angle, you can play forward diagonal passes all day, every day. Time will tell. And how she uses this off season to work on, not just the physical parts of the game, but still continue to refine, dealing with the pressure, dealing with mistakes, because ultimately that will be the separator for her in her career. I think, if she's with a national team for a couple more years or like 10 years.
Maybe this is an unpopular question here. Do you think it would serve Mandy McGlynn to not play on a team like Utah that has very, very different requirements than the U.S. women's national team if she wants to continue advancing or becoming the U.S. women's number one?
Loved it for like the first 2 years at least, right? When you're a young goalkeeper, you want to get peppered. You want to get peppered because that's how you learn, and that's how you grow, and that's how you get experience. I'm not saying that she needs to change teams by any stretch. Like, you look at Jordan Pickford. I mean, come on. Everton hasn't always been at the top of the table. He gets peppered every single game, right? So
yeah, he came from Sunderland, which is even worse. Yeah.
Right. Like, I don't think you necessarily need to play on the best teams. I think, playing on teams where you're getting a lot of action actually helps you prepare you in different ways because you get exposed. It also gives you an opportunity, like, to just tweak little parts of your game. Like, they weren't really in playoff contention most of the season, right? So you're afforded more opportunities to try and explore new solutions without really the repercussions of, postseason play. And maybe that's a little bit in hindsight, but it did kind of feel that way most of the season.
Let's close out with semifinals coming up this weekend. Morehouse, Berger, Arnold, Kingsbury. How are these four individuals going to make an impact in these two games? Like, how will their coaches and their talent profiles be able to shift the needle one way or the other?
I do think Kingsbury will be comfortable solving the pressure of Portland, being able to play through it, through whoever essentially Spirit have available and decide to play in the midfield. They're all super comfortable receiving the ball under pressure. That's going to be helpful because I think probably that's when Portland's at their best, is using their press. I also think Kingsbury's wise behind the back line. She's the best 1v1 goalkeeper in terms of final actions inside the box, but she's wise whether she can impact it or not. And she's also just happy to drop to protect the goal if need be. When it comes to Spirit, they can attack in any way that they want. They can play against teams that are comfortable sitting numbers back. I thought the turning point for the Spirit this year was when they won against Seattle 2-0 in a very convincing fashion, creating a bunch of quality chances against the lower block. But they can also be good in transition as well. So I think that's going to be a tall task for Mackenzie Arnold in terms of dealing with all of their unpredictable threats. And then as far as Gotham, I mean, Berger we've already kind of talked about it. She is very specific in terms of the way that she plays in the game behind the two center backs, because every time Sana and Carter are higher up the field, the most intuitive space to attack is behind them, because that's the most dangerous area in the field. And I think Berger does a pretty good job of patrolling that area. I think Morehouse is going to have one of her more consistent performances of the year.
Well, it's going to offer, hopefully, plenty of drama in the way that the quarterfinals did. But in the meantime, unfortunately, you're not calling either of these games, right?
I'm on the world feed, so unless you live in a different country, you're not going to hear me.
Well, if you
a fair number of our listeners will be hearing you, actually.
And yes, indeed, if you are one of our many international subscribers, you get the treat of getting Jill Loyden one more time here in the NWSL season on the call. For the rest of us, unfortunately, we'll have to wait until March of next year to get her back. But Jill Loyden, it is an absolute pleasure. I'm glad that we're making this a yearly thing. Can't wait for next year.
Thanks, you guys. It was a pleasure.